Hello,
Hello,
how's it going?
how you doing?
Can't complain. So, Kara's joining.
Here you've been having some interesting weather in your direction.
Yeah, we have had snow last weekend, which was nice. Snow nearby, and even where I am, it didn't settle on the ground here, but it did elsewhere. And given that our borders are closed both internationally and interstate, it seemed like there was millions of people all driving up this way to see the snow with nothing else to do on a weekend. So it was chaos, but no, it was nice, and it was strange seeing snow on the bush we have here. It just looks very incongruous, and kangaroos in snow. But that was good. But now it's warm, so it's now springtime, so it's all good. Oh, it might just be us today. Maybe give a few minutes. I pasted a few interesting links in that I thought people might be interested. There was a cloud storage app that was doing facial recognition on people's faces for, I didn't really look at what purpose, but they basically got shut down. I thought that was interesting. It was probably in the fine print or something of people providing their photos, who knows? But I thought that was an interesting piece of news. And another one I found was a website spinningup.openai.com. Like obviously the people do GPT-3 and all that fun stuff. They seem to be leading the way. And they talked about, there was sort of a good introduction that I enjoyed to reinforcement learning. And I learned a few things. And I also learned that in the state of the art, they do separate reinforcement learning into model-less reinforcement learning and ones that have models. And I thought that was interesting and relevant to us because we've talked a bit about reinforcement learning, but with the assumption that there's probably a model in there that's being retrained somehow. But they do talk about that I think they said the more common modes were model-less. So I don't know if that means there'll be a trend towards model-based reinforcement learning. So I thought that was kind of interesting because if the dominant thing is model-less, then that's a challenge to see how MLOps practices apply to that. If you've got this system that's almost alive and evolving, it's hard to, unless you capture the entire data stream that's going through it. If it's a real-time system or whatever, then that's going to be a challenge. So that'll be something interesting to watch, and maybe it evolves more to a model-based one where the models are effectively checkpoints and they don't need to evolve in real time. So I thought they have some good material out there, the OpenAI group. Like they've obviously at the bleeding edge of research. So I thought it was a good introduction to it.
I see the other thing that we're going to have to think about is having to introduce a 30-day delay into our pipelines for Australian customers.
Yes. Yes, that's right. That was in the news too. I should have put that in. Yeah, that was late. I was talking to people about that last Friday. Even my son brought it up. I was driving him to school late last week, and he's like, "Dad, what's this thing that pops up in YouTube and Google? I saw it at school." And so I had to explain it poorly, and then I went back and read some articles, and Stratacarry had some great analysis on it. And yeah, it was, and the people were confused because you've got the government organization, which is normally pretty good. They normally look after consumer rights, so they do some good stuff with warranties and things, but they seem well out of line here. And they seem to say, "Oh, we didn't say anything about giving away data or anything." And it's like they just said, "Oh, we just need a 30-day heads up for a change in algorithms." And then it hit me. It's like, well, all search today uses machine learning. It's the easiest way to do it. So the algorithm is the data that goes into it. Like it's you. So fundamentally, if you want to actually tell them the algorithm, it's like, well, here's all the data we used it to train in the last N days or whatever. So yeah, that was kind of shocking. Like that's an example of the escalation of data problem mentioned challenge. And so that was interesting. And then I was able to explain it to my son. And when it hit me, it's like, oh, I bet they use, yeah, what they actually mean is that they're using trained models to, based on all sorts of people's information to get the right information to the right people. And so it's not just an algorithm of weights of we look for tags in this way and we weight things from these domains over this one this week and this one to that one and response. No, it's not like that. It's like not hand coded. It's and it hasn't probably been for a decade or more. So yeah, I thought there was an interesting collision between the real world, the legislative world, and ML, and fundamentally ML ops. So you've had all this data that was like presumably not leaking out. Suddenly, theoretically, they might have to hand it over if you take it literally. So that was exciting and embarrassing as an Australian. So yeah.
But I think we're going to see a lot of these examples over the next few months and years.
Yeah. I mean, it was interesting because this one didn't even explicitly mention machine learning. It's like, I can totally imagine cases where they are systems that are smart and making decisions and banks and insurance companies or whatever. But this was something where even to me, it didn't occur to me what they were talking about until I thought for a second that hang on, it's like, yeah, of course, this is machine learning. But it was never mentioned anywhere. No one even thought about it. Even people who, work in this domain might not be obvious, but it's like, this just came right out. So yeah, I think you'll see it in a lot of places. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. Yeah.
What?
But it's, sorry, go.
What were they trying to achieve? Were they trying to achieve greater data protection or more protection on how data is actually being used, like the Ever example?
No, they were trying to, or the government organization was trying to, they were basically claiming that Google was making, and Facebook, they named them specifically, but making a significant amount of income due to the work of local news organizations. And those local news organizations should be compensated for that. And so they basically made a ruling that these two parties had to come together and form a binding agreement, or an arbitrator would. And part of that agreement was to agree how much they would pay them to put little news tiles on the Google page. I didn't really see it via Google, or maybe if you use an Android phone or something, or Facebook showing it. It didn't really make sense because the only time I ever see that is someone pastes a link to a local newspaper or whatever in Facebook, and then it unfurls it, and I read the content. And so they were saying they had to come to an agreement to pay the news providers for it, and that was interesting enough on its own, kind of like a weird sort of tax, but instead of the tax going to the people, it just went straight to. And of course, the driving force here was News Limited and Rupert Murdoch, no surprise there. But the side effect of that is they had all these extra riders, like they had to do certain things and notify them of changes to the algorithm with 30 days notice before they make a change. That actually said that. So 30-day notice for, and this is presumably a machine learning model that's trained by search data that's regional, and there's probably millions of features that go into that, which involve, people's browsing data and stuff that all get combined together to provide better search. And they're saying, well, we need 30 days notice of that. And that's not actually possible unless you take it literally and go, well, we'll give you all the data that was used to make this model. Here you go. And that's got all sorts of sensitive stuff in it, no doubt. So yeah, that's the sad story of it. But yeah, it was a good example of that. I think this could almost have been, from Google's point of view, is it escalation of data categories? Is that the one, Terry?
Yeah.
Like it's in order to and in this case, the idea is that it was doing something good for the people, but it escalated the data into something harmful. So interesting.
And obviously the easier solution is to just block those news agencies from all
Yes.
Google search results.
Yeah, which is what'll happen if they persist with it. It's happened in Germany, and the news organizations basically said, no, this is really bad. Our traffic's dropped off a cliff. Undo it. So and in Spain, I think they came to some agreement to give them a small amount of money, but it doesn't really make any difference. But yeah, it's the problematic thing is that wording around the algorithms and this misunderstanding that algorithms are separate from the data that built them. It's like, yeah, if you write code by hand, you could, as a developer, a whole lot of input went in. You talk to people who know the business domain that you're working in. Maybe you talk to actuaries if you're an insurance company. Maybe you talk to end users. All this information goes into you produce source code, and that gets compiled, and you can distribute that. And someone legally might say, we need to see the algorithm. You show the source code. You're probably not leaking anything from those conversations of personal information and stories about medical, because it's all written in code. You probably don't hard code in people's personal information, even in test cases. Like, every developer knows not to do that. But with a trained model, it's like, no, you're not. It's the data goes straight into that thing and gets combined into a model. But people don't understand that. Like, it's like I really think of models as like they're executables in a way. They're programs. They're just not written by a human. So to show the algorithm, you have to show all of the inputs to it, which is all of the data. Whereas if it's handwritten code, then you can kind of draw a line and go, well, you're obviously not going to get the developer's brain that did it, but you'll get the source code. And maybe the developer gets put on a stand in a court case and they have to explain who they talk to. And, maybe in the case of, I don't know if that happened in the Volkswagen diesel thing at all. It probably never went that far. But there's this hard line between the sensitive information that went into building the system and the artifact, whereas in models, machine learning, it's not there. So yeah, it was an interesting case.
What's so interesting is it seems like, because they did something similar in Europe, as you were saying, but it seems like this is almost attacking more, or like a countermeasure against an almost monopoly that something like Google has. Like it's against its size and its dominance, rather than even how it's using data. It's just as a side effect, it shows how data is to Google's and in general.
I mean, and there was some, I guess the government parties involved thought they would have the backing of the people, because there's this view that these big tech companies are not paying their fair share. And so they thought, well, this is something we can do to, but yeah, there's all these side effects of that. But yeah, I think where we went further was that algorithm thing that Terry mentioned, which then leaks into machine learning and data and things like that. So yeah, that would be an interesting case of if there was some legal demand of a model you had trained via doing good MLOps practices and things, and a government organization like our ACCC, as they're called, said we need to see that, or we need to see what changed, or like, would it satisfy them to give them the binary, which would be just I don't know, one of those formats, Terry, or a zipped up, tarred up TensorFlow protobuf things with all of the little parameters for the neural network, and go, look, here's the model, here's the algorithm we used, and it's just noise to a human, and here's the one we used last time, different noise. like with that, like this would have to go to court to satisfy it. Like we won't know, because if they say no to that, then you have to go back to the source data. And of course, if you've done, you know, the MLOps stuff we're talking about, then you would be able to do that. You'd be able to go back in some repository and go, here's the training data and the scripts, and you can reproduce it this way. But then you'd be giving away all the data. But could you kind of just go, look, here's the binary. Here's a 300 megabyte zip file that you could run in TensorFlow or something. Like that would.
There's the problem that if that stuff is self-learning, then it's effectively updating every few seconds.
Mm-hmm.
So you know you would just be flooding them with petabytes of continuous data.
Yeah.
That nobody could actually do anything useful with in any case.
Mm.
And you would somehow have to delay the actioning of that in an entire territory. So what you'd have to do is you'd have to add a 30-day delay to all search results in Australia.
Mm. Which is obviously would be, you know, catastrophic to the user experience. Like it's would, yeah, it's, but yeah, I guess it's maybe this will serve as a test case for that. I mean, this is a side effect of the bigger thing that'll probably not happen, but yeah, I if this is the first of many, then I can't imagine this stuff being resolved technically alone. It will, you know, there'll have to be something that goes to court before people understand what this is. Like, yeah, it was very interesting. Here's something very mainstream that my son's asking me about on the way to school, and it's like I effectively have to go, oh, this involves MLOps. Like it's a learning opportunity of like you can't do it. Here's why it is. It's not mainstream knowledge. So I guess the you know, maybe, I mean, the MLOps you know, roadmap is clearly not meant for mainstream sort of consumption, but are there extractions of it that could be authored with other people and published to kind of explain this, to educate a bit more of the mainstream, to say, here's why you can't just get an algorithm without the data, or if it's learning online, here's why you can't actually, you just, like the physical nature of this is different. Like you need to understand this world we're in now. You can't, it's hard enough to think into, like, even in the mainstream, the idea of source code and you know, IP, there's like a tiny bit of knowledge. I think there's been court cases here and there, and the word algorithm is thrown around in the mainstream, so there's some understanding of that. But like, does there need to be a little bit more mainstream? And by mainstream, maybe just mean journalism, journalists, mainstream developers, business analyst types. Maybe they need to have a little bit of education, like an executive summary of this is the minimum things you need to know that are running your life day to day. You're already using this every day, like when you use a Google search, when you use email, when you know, when you use your credit card and there's fraud detection, and or you get declined for something, then every day you're encountering models that have been trained that are an algorithm, but that exposing that algorithm means exposing all the data. Is that, I don't know. I thought that'd be an interesting thing for the right person to explain at the right level to come out of this, because I think that would help people understand. Like I'd be trying to explain it to family members and things like that, but I'm struggling.
Yeah, I mean, we're about to go into a period of time in which our fundamental legal system is going to be challenged, because you know, for the first time in a long time, we're encountering something that clearly does not fit within the current legal framework. And it's going to be a case of either modifying the legal framework or doing another hack like we did with corporations and just declaring them to be legal entities of the same class as a person, in order to be able to apply the same sets of laws to a corporate body as you do to a physical body. And so, we may end up seeing some jurisdictions actually giving, corporate status to algorithms and models as a way of then treating them within existing legal frameworks.
Right, because in that case, you could ask the model, you could interrogate the model, but you wouldn't necessarily get access to the data that it had access to. Like, it's got a personhood, so to speak.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where people have often talked about that in sci-fi like scenarios of personhood being granted to things that are sufficiently intelligent. But yeah, that's a different angle. Is like, we can't handle this way of legally, so we need to hack it like corporations. Yeah, that's an interesting. Yeah, because it makes no sense that corporations have personhood. I'm not sure if that's the same outside of the US. Maybe it is, but yeah, that's a thing, and that's real, and it's absurd, but it works enough. Or maybe it doesn't work that well, but it's in use. So yeah.
So in terms of where we are with the roadmap,
Yep.
we've now completed all of the challenges and technical requirements that we currently have in the document.
I think there was just one for me to complete last sections in sync solutions table. I hadn't had a chance to look at that.
Yeah, so it was the final pieces, filling in the gaps.
Right. Oh yeah, the trade-offs and okay, yep. Just some tidying up. Yep, nothing. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, so I guess we're now at the last bit, which is the solution section. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So what we need to do here is we need to go through this table, and then validate the map that's in there at the moment, and update anything that's missing. So the color code is, let me just cut across. So anything that's in yellow, we definitely need to edit. The remainder of the colors are the initial estimates that I put in for some of these things, and we need to review those. The classifications basically are if we don't know enough about it to even start working on a solution, then it's research required. If
so is yellow even before research required?
So yellow is unclassified. So from our perspective, it means that we've added something to the table, but we haven't yet
even thought about it.
Validated the numbers. And then blue is if we know that somebody's actively working on a solution, or we expect that people will be actively working on a solution by a given time. White is where we know or expect that a solution will be available and is being qualified. So it's pre-production level, but there are betas out there. People are testing things. And then grey is, there's a solution available and it's being continuously improved.
And the grey in that table right now is grey. It's not just blank.
Yeah.
So yeah. So the first one, right? So are we adding to this table, or are we validating the tellers that are there right now?
So when I first created the table, I put in some candidate values, but as we've added additional items to the other tables, I've just added those to the bottom of this table and marked them as to be determined. So some of these I think are pretty straightforward. I mean, educating data science teams regarding the risks of trying to use Jupyter notebooks in production.
I think that's well underway. Everyone knows that that's a problem.
So treating machine learning assets as first-class citizens in DevOps processes, clearly we've got solutions out there which are starting to do that. More improvement is needed, but it's something that's
it's more that, and the one above are probably more a matter of adoption, I guess, rather than like they exist, but it's like they're not evenly used. So is that what white means? So
no, so white would be, somebody's got a beta out there, but it's not broadly adopted yet.
Right.
Whereas grey is,
it's the state of the art.
People are using
and
it.
Yeah. Or if they're not using it, they should be, but they haven't got. Like CI/CD, it's out there. People use it. Other people don't use it, but they should. Like SCM, surely everyone uses it, but you just know there's someone that doesn't. But it's fair to say that it's mature and improving.
So, providing mechanisms by which training sets, training scripts, and service wrappers may all be versioned appropriately. Again, some of the solutions can already do that to some extent. So we're in that continuous improvement phase. Providing mechanisms by which changes to training sets, training scripts, and service wrappers may all be auditable across their full life cycle. Now, this is something that I feel was still in development at the point at which I wrote this. It may be optimistic to see that as available in
it's this year. Yeah. What should that be, white to the right of that, or instead of grey? Like it might take is that the progression? It would go blue, then white, then grey.
Typically, what you've got to think about is that each of these blocks represents a year. So things that are going to be difficult might take a year to go through qualification. Things that are going to be more straightforward will
they can, as soon as they're ready, people can use it. Right.
So that's the thing we need to think about is, is this something that's available immediately, or is it something that's going to take a while to develop, or is it something that's going to take a while to develop and then a while to actually really get working in sort of usable situations?
Treating training sets as managed assets. If anything, for that one, it seems like there's a bunch of things out there sort of vying for people to use them. There's different projects or products that will look like Git or something like it for managing data. It seems almost like there almost needs to be a bit of a consolidation of approaches, and then people will start using it.
I think there's probably an argument that we need to shift that to the right, because we're not going to see maturity in that space this year now. Now the security one, again, we're seeing very limited activity in that space. You know, we've seen some drivers this year, and we've seen some actual problems occurring, but
no, there's no. Yeah, it feels like with it feels like with security that like there needs to be more accidents for improvements to happen. Just like with airliners, like there were probably very dangerous things to fly around on in 50s and 60s. But each accident taught people a lot, and now they're very safe. So it feels like often with things like this, it's just bad things have to happen for good things to happen, unfortunately.
yeah. So again,
because I think there's such a rush to build things with machine learning because it's so effective at certain problems that people will just do it and not necessarily treat the data with the same care that they need to, and then accidents will happen because it's just so tempting to build cool stuff with it.
Yeah. So I think again we need to shift that right a year, and I think this is one where the rollout of this will be a lot slower, and there'll be a need for a lot more pre-qualification activities.
Yeah, just take a note on that. And the privacy GDPR, the right to be forgotten, yes. Who knows? Like it's
So we haven't qualified that. I don't think it's very well considered.
I mean, can we add a row below that to go things like this Australian law around Google providing advance notice of algorithms? Maybe that's too generic, or not too generic. Maybe that's too narrow to be included in here. But it seems like even in this past week, a novel challenge has popped up that's to be determined. We don't know whether, like, is there some value in having a catch-all there for other legislative actions that may affect MLOps that you know that are already happening? So that if this is happening, there's going to be more, right?
Yeah, well, I think we've got that in terms of the risk that we talked about in the last session, where we're pointing out the fact that there will be unintended consequences resulting from knee-jerk legislative.
Yeah, but I guess my point is, like, is there a room for a row that's like the solution, which may be something like a hack like personhood? Like, it sounds crazy. Like that if that solution worked, then that would be a viable solution to that legal problem. Yeah, I don't really know how to word it, so yeah, probably not.
Yeah, but this particular one is about how you actually simplify the process of allowing people to respond to GDPR requirements by making it easy for them to invalidate models and retrain them automatically as a result of subject access requests and the right to read.
And of course, that's a great angle for a denial of service, which you could kind of already do with GDPR today. You could spam a company with all sorts of requests for data and things, but this takes it to the next level because retraining a model is quite expensive. Like the GPT-3 model from OpenAI cost $5 million to train. So if it falls foul of right to be forgotten because there's some web page that it ingested that it wasn't meant to, then that's $5 million for a GDPR request if it was to apply. So yeah, it's a very real thing.
So I get the feeling that this one is probably not really going to be widely available in the next 3 years.
Mm.
So there'll probably be ongoing development, and then a period of qualification, and so we're probably looking at sort of blue, white, grey on this.
Mm. Let's take a note of that.
Methods for wrapping trained models as deployable services in scenarios where data scientists train the models may not be experienced software developers.
I'd say, based on my experience here, I'd say that's definitely underway. I look at things like Metaflow from Netflix, and that's something they've built that they're actively using and starting to promote. There's probably some various startups out there that are doing that. I know I've seen some that claim this is their aim, so I think it's reasonable to say that development is underway for that, at least.
Yeah, I think that one's probably about right.
Like, it's probably maybe not next year, but maybe the year after we'll start to see it apply. But I think it could go, what is it, white for a bit, because it might take a while for it to sort of be fully absorbed.
Yeah, well, I think this is one where it's not, it doesn't require a lot of integration with third parties, whereas the things like the security ones will require, broad alignment with other security assets and systems. So there'll be a long period of trying to, align systems so that they can all talk to each other and share information in an appropriate way. Whereas this is just a matter of solution providers implementing a version of this solution for customers to use.
Right.
And some of that, for example, is already in the Jenkins X solution.
Right. Yeah.
But it requires more work to really make it universally applicable.
Yeah.
So my feeling on this one is probably about right as it is.
Okay. Yep. Sounds good. Yeah. That's right.
Approaches for enabling all machine learning frameworks to be used within the scope of MLOps, regardless of language or platform. So that's going to be an ongoing process.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, there's all sorts of things happening out there in different languages. And then there's the rise of unsupervised learning. That's something I've been working with lately, which has different ways of training, but I imagine it'll settle down and be similar. So yeah, I think that'll be an ongoing thing for a while yet. It's just when things are so new, it's just easy for them to have their own way of working for a while. Like, someone comes up with something new, then they're not necessarily going to look at things like MLOps, like it's still too new to consider that. Yeah, I think that sounds about right where it is.
Okay. Approaches for enabling MLOps to support a broad range of target platforms, including but not limited to CPU, GPU, TPU, custom ASICs, and neuromorphic silicon. So certainly a chunk of this is still at the research stage right now.
Mm. Would some of the stuff that Apple are doing in with their custom silicon come under this a little bit?
Yeah, well, again, you're going to have a lot of people who are doing this already, but they're doing it by completely bespoke methods.
Yeah.
And then what we're talking about in this particular challenge is about providing standardized ways of doing that with conventional tooling so that it's open to everybody.
Yeah, if anything, this one seems a little optimistic, that time frame. Yeah, you mentioned it.
Yeah, so that might be that it's two blacks and two blues.
Yeah.
Or possibly even push the grey off the end of the map.
When we're looking at this question, does it encompass things like what do they call it? Edge training? I forget the word for it, edge something. And basically, a lot of your data is being collected and used in forming your model or influencing your model at its point of being gathered. So basically, like on phones or on various IoT things.
So that'll be the use case for needing to do this. But specifically, this is about being able to do things like cross-training so that you train on GPU and then produce a model that is deployable in silicon.
Okay.
So these are things that are partly.
I think normally with Edge, they might mean it runs on your phone or something, or maybe TensorFlow JS. Although Apple does have some neural chip, I think they call it. It's probably a GPU that you can target. That I guess comes as that.
So
which is certainly, yeah.
In the way that Edge is being used, say in the IRDS roadmap at the moment, it's focused much more in terms of things like factory automation or smart cities, where you're actually looking at massive amounts of smart sensors being deployed, and then having sort of things like your automated traffic management systems, where you've got local networks of sensors that are reporting back to intersections where there's a certain amount of processing going on to work out what the state of a set of traffic lights should be, and then passing that information out through the network and back to the autonomous vehicles to warn them about the status of other vehicles approaching blind junctions and things like that. So it's a level below the sort of edge devices that we're used to, at a human level. It's now being pushed out to, the number of edge devices will be orders of magnitude greater than the numbers of smartphones in the field,
right?
Because there'll be just an even smaller granularity, and there'll be many more of them.
It's I was reading in the past week that Google are using or planning on using their Android phones to detect earthquakes, like the accelerometers and the slight movements in some time coupled fashion means they can detect earthquakes globally, which I thought was fascinating. I mean, they're not doing the computation on the edge, because I doubt an individual phone would know that there's an earthquake, but correlating it with nearby ones might. So I thought that was an interesting case of sensing at the edge. But yeah, who knows? They might do more in the future. I'm going to have to call it a day because I got to get going.
Okay, no problem. Well, I'll
So
update the ones that we've done to date.
Yep.
And then next session, we can push through and
push through and get
perhaps
that done.
do the
And
rest of them.
yeah, I like the idea of some sort of content somewhere on explaining ML ops to anyone or a subset of it. I don't know if we have our wheels turning in our mind, maybe we'll think of either someone that could write it or some way to express what we're thinking, because this stuff that was in the news about the Australian media and Facebook and Google it'd just be some great content to have out there to explain to people simply. It's like an algorithm is not an algorithm anymore without data. So yeah, if you have, Cara, if you have any bright ways to express that, or if I do, then maybe we should collaborate on some content under the CDF banner or something, and get that, because I just think that would be good to get that knowledge out there.
Well, I think this is one of those areas where actually there's already quite a lot of stuff out there, but you need to look at things like Bostrom's Superintelligence book, things like
Yes,
that.
I'm actually reading
It's
that right
actually
now.
addressing the core
Yeah.
challenges.
Yeah, he goes into almost fractal detail, like in every little angle of what if we did this, and then takes that to extreme, and then he backs back out. It's a very interesting book. So I'm reading through it. I read it at nighttime, but then I fall asleep. So, and then have weird dreams. But it's an excellent book. But yeah, I mean, what I mean is like something that would go on, more almost mainstream news sites, like just to explain to people what an algorithm is in this world, because they've only just started to understand what they thought it was, but that's no longer true with trained models. So it's just something I think it would be good for people to know. The more people that knew, then the more knee-jerk things happen that would just be ineffective. Like this thing of saying Google have to give them 30 days notice. If there was some mainstream understanding of what an algorithm is in this world, that would not happen. So anyway, just a thought. Yeah, maybe there is content out there to research and restate again and again. It's just, that's often what it is. It's just, or finding a journalist that's happy to restate things, and yeah, could be something good to do. All right, I'm gonna sign off.
All right, thanks everyone.
Bye,
All right, pleasure as always. Talk next time.